Welcome, everybody, to the Sentinels of Liberty podcast. I hope everybody's having a fantastic Sunday. I know it's kind of a little bit of a mix-up from when I normally do it on Saturdays. I just wanted to have a little bit of extra time just to make sure that I kind of have all of my ducks in a row, so to speak. But thank you so much for joining me on this Sunday evening. As always, I know it's one of those things that seems a little overdone, but really, if you like what I do here, think about throwing a like, a subscribe, share the videos. It really, really does help with the algorithm. And as I'm sure many of you know, that fighting the algorithm it seems like it's almost a full-time job, and I can't do it without each and every one of you. So thank you for all of you who come to the episodes, and thank you for your support. Now, tonight, we are going to have a conversation. It's going to be... I kind of did the sunk cost state part 2, mostly because I feel like with everything that's going on, it seemed to make the most sense. And I think that delving back into this particular conversation now more than ever seemed fairly relevant. So hopefully you guys and gals get a fair bit out of this. And the subjects that we're going to cover tonight are going to be everything from essentially going back to the realm of conquest and war and, things like Epstein and the subsequent cover-ups that are there. And then we look at the kind of the expansion of just this apparatus of centralization that just seems to be growing more and more and more and kind of intervening and intertwining itself more and more within our own lives. And it's something that I feel it's a message that you have to really try and hit home with, because just in the past few weeks we've just seen an onslaught of people willing to excuse things that our founders had fought a long bloody war for, to kind of get away from these things, to kind of stay away from the abuses of power, the violations of the Constitution, and so many of these other things that we're seeing today. They fought to avoid these things. They fought to have a new start and a new beginning where these things would not be prevalent. And unfortunately, here today, we're starting to see more and more of this as it comes down the line. So without further ado, of course, I guarantee it's probably going to be one of those things. I've had a couple energy drinks and some coffee, so just bear with me here. So let's get into it. So look, one of the central themes that I have talked about previously in the first episode that I did pertaining to the sunk cost state is essentially that the state has a very, very hard time not only admitting failure when it does fail, but also admitting the fact, like, hey, this isn't right. This isn't, this is something that's wrong. It's darn near criminal, right? I don't think you're ever going to hear of the state ever. And when I say the state, I mean the government of the United States. I don't think you're ever going to see these people ever throw themselves under the bus. Matter of fact, I would wager to argue that you're never going to see them ever deviate from that type of situation. If anything, they're going to try and obfuscate and divert and avoid any form of accountability whatsoever. So going into the first portion here, we're going to look at the state essentially having just this difficult time, or rather this willingness to not admit that it has failed in so many different things. And when we look at the defining trait of essentially what we know today as the American state, right? The American state being the general federal government. And I would argue you could see this down, a sense of failure down at the individual states. But today we're going to talk about the federal government. It's one of those things where it's not just a matter necessarily of corruption, incompetence, arrogance, but rather it's the fact that these people can admit failure. But here's why, right? Well, we'll get into why here. But when we look at the state and the things it can't necessarily admit, we're looking at wars, interventions. We're looking at created chaos. Narratives, if there's bad narratives, if there's false narratives, it's usually replaced by another one that's just going to drive hypersensationalism. We're looking at secrecy, and we're looking at things that are kind of in line and subsequent with that, or the same or really the same machinery or the same tactics or vehicle, if you will, uh, is essentially used abroad. And it's something that we've seen more and more increasingly at home. And I think that's a very important thing to see. So if they can't admit their failures, if they can't admit the things that they've done wrong and the things that they've got wrong for issues that are abroad, we're going to see this perpetual cycle follow its way back home. So essentially, instead of actually fixing the problem, which we know that the government's never going to blame itself, essentially, it tends to have this escalatory ladder, if you will, where, and this is really what encapsulates this sunk cost state mentality. It's too invested and forced to stop. You have one of these situations where it's like, well, we're in it now, so we can't possibly turn this boat around and correct our behavior. We just have to continue doing the bad thing or the wrong thing or the unconstitutional thing because we're too far in. It's a horrible, worthless excuse for people that really are not necessarily invested in maintaining the constitutionality or the lawfulness within the country, but people who have their own desires. In conjunction with that, they're too invested in having this perfect image to be able to tell the truth, right? You have a situation where this, the state apparatus is, well, we have to make this image look good. We have to do it no matter what. We have to continue maintaining the status quo no matter what. And, we can't afford to tell the truth because the truth is going to destroy us. Essentially, that's what it is, or it could be very damaging in the very least. And, what you'll hear people say is like, well, it would change everything we know as we know it, right? And it's like, okay, if that's the case, then perhaps that's the change we do need. And along with that, you're going to see something along the lines of being too invested in power to relinquish it. You've never seen government take on authority that it will willfully ever relinquish. That is a long-standing maxim as it pertains to government, and it's a long-standing maxim, especially as it pertains to empires. So as we continue moving forward, I want to put this out there as well, that it's not simply a condemnation, or it's not simply just something that I'm framing for this particular administration. It's not just one administration. It is essentially a regime habit. It is something that is self-protective. The state will protect itself at all costs. It survives elections because both parties essentially benefit from it. You have these people that are overwhelmingly convinced that, if I don't side with one party, the other party is going to get into power. And if I don't side with that party, this other party is going to get into power. And it's this machine that doesn't care what you think. It doesn't care what party you support, because it's all part of the same large apparatus. And it's highly destructive to the American people in general. And we'll come back to that, and we're gonna go over that a little bit more. But first, I want to talk about the imperialism or the empire as it pertains to abroad, and how essentially, when we step back and we look, war has become routine. It has become the go-to foreign policy cudgel, whether it's Iran, whether it's Syria, whether it's Ukraine war, whatever the case might be, or even like Venezuela and now potentially Cuba. It becomes a situation to where we send people over in this half-hearted attempt where we're like, oh yeah, we will negotiate with you. We'll send diplomats. We'll do this. If you even want to call these people diplomats or people of statecraft, we'll send these people over to have conversations with you, and we'll try to come to an agreement. But the entire time, there's virtually no movement whatsoever that's even going to provide any sense of grace, if you will, to even hear the other perspective or to understand the other person's side for why or why not they may be doing something. But in addition, what you tend to have with that is we have set a standard now to anybody that potentially wants to talk with us. Now people have to wonder whether or not it's a massive ruse or whether or not they're going to be at the other end of a drone strike. So there's a lot of lessons that have come out from negotiating habits as it pertains to the U.S. And we're going to go over a few things here. So one of the main points is the United States no longer treats war as a rare constitutional last resort. It tends to be, as I said, that leading edge of the cudgel that we try to beat people into submission with. It's amazing to me how you have people that are just like, oh, it's not a real war. It's not this, it's not that. But yet force tends to be the one thing. And it's not just Trump, but it does tend to be the one thing that we always say, like, oh, we reluctantly go towards in order to come to an agreement. But what it just tells me is we don't have people that are actually capable of reasonable, rational negotiations. And even some of them that, the current administration, if you will, even comes away and says, like, oh yeah, we helped mediate or we helped negotiate this. You end up seeing these countries come back and saying, like, no, like, you didn't stop this, you didn't do this. We actually, yes, you may have brought two of us to the table, but in the end of the day, we did most of the footwork, and it wasn't the United States that does that. So we have to evaluate, like, why, when we look at these situations, why is it that this tends to be the most prolific and prominent instrument of foreign policy? It's extremely problematic, and eventually, there is this cyclical situation or blowback that you tend to get when all you result to is force. So over the last several years, the United States has funded and prolonged several wars, concluded or conducted strikes, I apologize, in multiple countries. We see that, not just this administration, but many, many American administrations have done this in conjunction with supporting regime change operations, imposing blockades and seizures. We have seen sanctions. We have seen so many other things, and they've all justified it with language designed to avoid the word of war, right? Because what does war imply? Well, war would technically imply a sense of responsibility. You have to answer to somebody. You have to be accountable for what it is you do. And if you can't call it war, then it lessens that realm of accountability, and it lessens that realm of responsibility, at least as they would see it in their eyes. So moving ahead, we have to also look at some examples, right? So we have situations to where, yes, we do still invariably feed the Ukrainian war machine. On Ukraine's side, we still provide some type of arms or whatever. And I know that people are going to sit here and be like, well, the NATO and the EU, they're buying it from us, whatever the case is. Okay, I get that, but you still can't deny the fact that we are still providing, by way of like a nice little backdoor, arms, weapons, and all of that to Ukraine. Now, to be fair, some of that may have slowed down a bit. Some of it may have been reduced, but we still provide intelligence. We still provide a lot of other resources to Ukraine, and we've certainly done very, very little in terms of being able to come around to being involved in any real rational conversations that don't involve us being a party to some way of this war or this conflict in Ukraine. We've seen the military escalation as it pertains to Iran. We have bombed much of their leadership. We have bombed many places in Iran, not only once, but twice during this administration, when this administration in particular was, well, Trump at least, and Vance initially had talked about how terrible regime change wars are, how terrible wars in the Middle East are, what a farce and what a debacle they really were. We were lied into this and we're lied into that, and here we are. We're seeing this, this propaganda machine just churning out video after video after video on places like X, essentially, to try and foster some type of, I don't know if it's like a political PR win, if it's trying to convince people that things are just going swimmingly and there's nothing to worry about, which I would argue the fact that we've already lost U.S. service members is kind of indicative of the fact that it's not maybe necessarily going the way we thought. There's a lot of meat and potatoes there, and I'm going to try and stay on track here, but you can see that ladder of escalation as it continues to go on. And let us not forget that we've seen also regime changes in places like Venezuela. We have seen things like that in Syria in particular. We have seen manipulation, change, at the hands of like the regime there, and in terms of intervention. And now we've had this guy who was one of the leading terrorists over in the Middle East. We had them sitting in our White House, and for whatever reason, miraculously, he's supposed to be the good guy now, right? You know, it's nothing. The United States loves to go on these rants about proxies and this and that. We have so many different proxies over in the Middle East, and we have funded so many organizations over in the Middle East over the duration of the last 20 years that if you look at any of the work that people like Scott Horton have done and many others, they will show you, almost down to the date and time accounts where the United States was fighting itself with two different proxies, a proxy working for the Department of Defense and a proxy working for the CIA. It's absolutely buffoon stuff. And, and we have a government that has the nerve to sit here and talk about proxies when we run some of the most well-funded, well-trained proxies that exist. It's comedy that writes itself. It's no different when we talk about South America, Central America, and all of the different dealings with the cartels and criminal elements, as well as the coup d'etats and the regime changes down there, and Venezuela happening to be some of the most recent examples. And all of these things, whether it's politically motivated, whether it's resource motivated, whether it's just purely regime change, or the fact that we decided to bomb somebody on a Tuesday morning for no reason other than the fact that it felt like the right thing to do, which seems to be most of the U.S. foreign policy, it all comes down to this realm to where they try to change the words, they try to change all of the verbiage surrounding this, trying to make it seem like it's nothing that is necessarily war. But if you look at the founders' definition of what war is, the one that they understood, the one that was carried through for a very long time and our country was founded on, you will see that that is directly contradicting of what exactly war is in terms of how they see it, the founders see it, and then in terms of how the contemporary U.S. government sees it. So, man, that was a lot. So when we continue down here, this administration says these aren't wars because once they are honestly named as war, again, going back over this, Congress is supposed to matter, right? The Congress now becomes part of this situation. It's supposed to, anyways, right? The Constitution is supposed to matter. So if they were to admit that it was a war, then they would actually kind of have to say, yeah, we are directly violating the Constitution because, we feel that we can get away with this for whatever the reason might be. Now, I understand that you're going to have people that are going to talk about this act or that act or this precedent or this other precedent. And the end of the day, unconstitutionality should not be something that gives you the okay to just go forward and to do whatever it is that you want, and especially when you try to adjust the narrative to excuse bad behavior. And on top of that, we the people are supposed to matter. We are supposed to be the primary drivers of the things that occur in this republic. We elect people, we put them in positions of power, and hopefully with the understanding that they're going to be representatives to us. But that only matters. All of these things only matter when you can actually have some form of honesty and you can be straightforward and transparent with the people. But that opens up a whole can of worms for any administration, because then they would have to have accountability, you would have to have responsibility, and you would have to own a bad decision or a bad mistake. I don't think you're ever really going to see that from either this administration. You certainly didn't see it from the previous administrations, and I don't really have much hope that we're going to see something like that in terms of future administrations. I certainly hope that I'm wrong about the future. I really do. But as it stands right now, if you're a pattern person like I am, I just don't see it being the case. But here's the thing. If force is being used against sovereign nations, then this is not policy management, right? It is war in substance, right? So essentially, once a government becomes, what you get is once a government becomes comfortable treating force as routine abroad, when it becomes their foreign policy measure of choice, it becomes comfortable treating control as routine at home, right? So if you're not willing to hold these people accountable and you're not willing to say, hey, like this is no bueno, man. Like, this is not the way this is supposed to be. It's not the way it's supposed to go. You are going far beyond your means and your authority. If we're not willing to check them on that stuff abroad, for as terrible as some of the things are abroad, then I highly, highly doubt that many people are going to want to check them for the abuses that they perpetrate on us at home. And so I think when we step back and we really do evaluate a large amount of the things that we see perpetrated abroad, we should take some pause and really try and ask ourselves, well, if they're willing to do this to somebody else, what are they willing to do to us? Now, one thing that I think is important that we absolutely have to analyze here is the sovereignty means nothing to an empire, right? And so what does this mean? Well, I've said this several times, and many other people smarter than me have also echoed this same sentiment, that the United States is very well becoming an empire. The days of the Republic certainly seem numbered, if not almost entirely gone completely. And so we have to try and evaluate this from a situation that is realistic. Now, you might be wondering about the sovereignty point and why it means nothing to an empire. Well, one of the main points here is the U.S. increasingly treats other nations not necessarily as sovereign equals, but rather as territories to pressure, governments to replace, essentially resources to influence, as well as populations to manage. I mean, when you look at what happened in places like Venezuela, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, heck, you even had, for a time, and I'm sure it's still probably there in the back burner, places like Greenland. And then you look at many of these supposed allies that we have in Europe, and you look at how much control we actually have over much of the day-to-day goings on as it pertains to foreign policy and the ability to make decisions. What you're creating at that juncture is a slew or a set of vassal states, or an organization of vassal states that ultimately answer to us, which creates a lot of problems, because not only do you start to continue to ignore to a much greater extent the people at home and solve all of our problems here, but now you put yourself in a place to where other people's conflicts are very much even more so ours. The population woes become more and more ours, because you have things like defense contracting, the military industrial contract, which we sell billions upon billions of dollars worth of military equipment to people in Europe and all over the world. And so you start to have these responsibilities that just add up and up and up. And as I was saying before, if we don't have a government that can even be responsible to basic things, what makes us think that we have any right whatsoever to start making decisions or even rule with an iron fist foreign policy or other decisions of other countries, despite the fact that it's horrible, it's reprehensible, and Washington had a number of times, as well as echoed by other founders, not to be involved in entangling alliances or a perpetual hatred for somebody else. I digress. When we look at examples here, right, we look at places like Venezuela, which, when we go back over the things that I just talked about, the different mechanisms, Venezuela, we did blockades, we did tanker seizures, we did rhetoric implying the fact that, like, the United States, for whatever reason, is going to assert an ownership role. We took the leader of another country in a military operation and are trying him here in the United States, a sovereign country. Whether you agree with that country, the leadership, whatever or not, it is not our place to be doing this, especially when you have this whole situation that is blown out of proportion. It's built on lies. And they tried to push this rhetoric about the drugs, when anybody can open up a basic spreadsheet that's put out there. It's publicly available information that shows that the type of drugs it is that they said they were attempting to seize, barely any of it at all, the lowest percentile possible, was coming from Venezuela. And there are many other host countries, or many other countries that are more culpable in the drug smuggling. Not that I believe that we should be taking a hardline intervention in there either, but the point being is you see this pattern arise to where you see the rhetoric, you see the propaganda, you see the talking points, and at some point you have to step back and be like, what the heck are we even doing here, right? We look at Syria, places like Syria, there's a lot of shifting alliances there, and really that is dependent on what side of the bed, I guess, the administration decides. And again, it's not just this administration, it's many other administrations. What side of the bed they wake up on is who we're going to ally with that day, that month, or that year. In conjunction, we also see support or abandonment based off of Washington's convenience, whether it's completely convenient for us or, convenient to our allies, which again, we should not be beholden to any of their desires, any of their fears, any of their aspirations. But I digress. We look at places like Iran, where we have continuously coerced and we've continuously sanctioned and we've continuously put pressure, including military strikes, into this area as well. And it's one of very, very many places that we have bombed perpetually for a very long time. And ultimately, again, as I described, what had happened is, we've gone out, we've bombed their government, we've bombed many places in Iran. And so this is another just pattern-esque type situation that we continue to see the United States go in. And there's really no real drawbacks here as it pertains to these types of things in terms of the United States' ambition, any sensical or sense of reality as it pertains to the bureaucrats and the politicians in Washington. Now, if we want to kind of step back for a moment, right? Let's try and take a look at more of a liberty-oriented angle, right? A government that does not respect the sovereignty of other peoples will not indefinitely respect the liberty of its own people. I believe that wholeheartedly. The founders believe that wholeheartedly. And many people today who often advocate or try to help defend liberty here at home, they recognize that war has been the ruin of many nations, notwithstanding, the most obvious places like Rome and Greece and so many others in history. But war has been the ruin of many nations contemporarily, especially wars that don't ever really seem to have any form of an end. And most assuredly, wars that are illegal. They've always destroyed and they've always beaten down the liberties and the rights of the people, invariably, always at home. It comes back around to bite us. When you have this empire mentality, the empire tends to train the state to think in terms of domination, exception, management, and obedience, which that mentality, it never stays overseas. If we start getting deeper and deeper and deeper into this warfare, and we actually do stay in a sense of perpetual warfare, locked in heated battle with the rest of the world, as it's seemingly been for a long time, we get more things like the Patriot Act. We get things that are expanded like the NDAA. We get more arbitrary legislation that's trying to tell people you can't say these things about this country, or you can't do these things, or you can't go to these places, or whatever the case is. You start seeing more and more control exerted on the people. And my question here is, at what point do we start to see these things start to evolve, start to take shape, not only as it pertains to speech, but how many more things are we going to see evolve in the realm of private property? How many more things are we going to start to see evolve in disarmament? Because my mindset and in the way that I've kind of understood a lot of history, especially history with the American Revolution, is once you start getting enough dissent, the fear of tyrants and the fear of those whom would control you shifts over to the ability of the people to be armed, well armed, in fact, not just basic rifles or basic handguns, the ability for the people to own any type of arms. And they have to nullify that. They have to try and control that. They have to try and decrease it, because they understand that at some point, a people becomes restless. And when those people become restless, they tend to use the most effectual means of defense. I didn't write the rules. I'm just speaking what the founders understood, and I'm just saying what has happened through history, time and time and time and again. So it would not surprise me, the farther down we get with this type of behavior, I think you'll start to see more excuses potentially made on behalf of the expansion of control, especially as it pertains to wars, with the expansion of taking people's firearms. I mean, just look, for instance, what they have done to people that are veterans, for instance. Oh, there's been instances to where they've gotten to the point to where it's like, oh, we can't have you take firearm or have firearms, because they've said the quiet part out loud. We deem you as a threat. So how long is it before they deem all of us a threat, or to varying degrees, which varying degrees ultimately adds up to the final product, because of the fact that, they're trying to exert this force abroad, and they understand that in order to try and maintain support for that, they have to clamp down at home. I know that was long-winded. Thank you for staying with me on that. So we'll move forward here to the next point. So as we move forward, it would be helpful if I could keep my notes a little bit more orderly. The founders' definition of war, and I said that we're going to kind of get back to this. So the founders did not define war necessarily by size, number, troops, public relations language. They defined it by hostile action. This had, again, it had no measurement. It had no point of, or it had no real parameters. The only thing was essentially the use of force from one sovereign upon another was considered to be enough to constitute what was war. Now, that use of force essentially can come in many realms. There's a few here that I can explain. It comes in the realm of strikes, operations, blockades, seizures, raids, military coercion. Some people have said that even sanctions could be a form of war, depending on how you look at it. But the point is there's a number of different ways that you can utilize force. And it doesn't have to be a massive amount of military power. It's simply just force that one sovereign uses upon another to effect some type of change or to exert one's will, right? They all count in substance. So overall, the modern government survives through euphemisms, essentially. Things like, oh, it's a limited action, it's an operation, it's an interdiction, it's deterrence, it's just a kinetic strike. It's nothing to simply worry about. They try to redefine these parameters in order to soften the blow of what war actually is, of what the definition is and what the parameters and the responsibilities of war are. It also makes it a lot easier for them to, and I hate to say this, for them to excuse and write away any potential deaths of U.S. service members in line of duty as it pertains to these actions, which I think is absolutely reprehensible. Yeah, they might come out and say, like, these people were heroes or these people died defending our great nation, but they won't ever take the responsibility of, one, who got them involved in that, but two, also calling it what it is, which I think is reprehensible. And I think it's absolutely egregious and offensive to what our founding fathers fought and died for, and most importantly, what our country is founded on. We have this thing called the Constitution, which is a set of parameters and essentially outlines what the authority of the government is. And when you start to see these people draw themselves away from this and they start to just write it off as, well, Obama did this, or, well, Bush did this, or so-and-so did this, it's not that big of a deal, as if it somewhat excuses themselves from the responsibility of war. And I think that that's one thing that we've seen a lot of in recent days and recent weeks, is a lot of people are excusing this because, oh, this president did this, or, oh, well, Congress didn't say that it was illegal, or they weren't overwhelmingly opposed to it, so it's not that bad. The founders would not have recognized those as exemptions, right, from war powers. If one sovereign, as I said, uses force against another, the constitutional problem is already present. Again, that's when you stop and you say, hey, we have a situation here. We need to have a formal declaration. So then that way we can respond properly in a way that is befitting, right? Now, that all being said, the president Well, let me not get ahead here. So if the United States is striking Iran, blockading, or necessarily uh, stealing Venezuela's president, if we're going after the leaders of a country, seizing vessels, supporting coercive regime change, then the administration cannot honestly claim this falls outside of constitutional war framework. Again, when you look at the definition of what war is, you look at how our founders understood it, right? These things all fall under the realm of war, and in the conducting of war, the only caveat, and I think, let's see here, the only caveat is when you have an imminent attack on the United States, when you have an invasion on the United States, right? And we have to understand what imminent means. Like, it is here, it is on our doorstep. And you've seen people try to play this off, and they've tried to restructure it, saying that, oh, these people have been, they're brooding, they're ready, they're ready. Preemption is not imminent, okay? Preemption is not imminent. You can preemptively strike something that is not an imminent threat. Imminent is on our doorstep, it is on our shores, it is here. The president has the ability to repel this, right, without congressional approval. That is the one thing that he has the ability to do. But after that repulsion is made, after it is done, that's it. That's it. So we have a situation to where a lot of people are trying to mix us up. They're trying to obfuscate. They're trying to change the definitions in order to suit a preemptive attack, an offensive attack, to try and make all of the things that we're doing abroad seem okay, seem like they're fine, they're well within the Constitution. This is not the case. This is absolutely not the case. And anybody who spent any time reading, learning, studying the Constitution whatsoever fundamentally understands that. The founders didn't stutter in their writing. They said what they meant. And so it doesn't matter how much you try to change those definitions. It also does not change the context of the way that they're going about it. Defensiveness was the primary object of war for the United States. We do not go forth and seek monsters to destroy abroad. We don't go forth and make war with other people whenever we feel like it. Wars of choice, wars of regime change, simply because we don't like somebody. What constituted our ability, more often than not, and of course, if you're going to wage war, yes, you need congressional approval, but the whole premise was on defense, right? So I digress. There is an abdication by Congress to the executive war machine. The problem is not just the president. Congress has overwhelmingly surrendered its delegated authority, and herein lies a huge portion of the problem. Congress was meant to decide whether the nation goes to war. Instead, now it funds it, it ratifies their abdicated authority. So when I'm talking about funding and ratifying, we're talking about the fact that the executive takes us to war, and it doesn't question it, right? Which is what I'm getting to, is it passively tolerates executive action after the fact. There's no questioning. We just recently saw the War Powers Act was struck down, and while I'm not necessarily a big fan of that, what I think is very glaring is the Congress's unwillingness to do their job, which is to hold the executive accountable and to enforce their position of their delegated authority as it pertains to war. Now, you have these conversations where people say, oh, well, Congress declares war. They don't make war. In order to make war, you have to declare war. That's the way that goes, right? Again, you go into the Constitution, you go into the supreme law of the land, and you look at the delegated authority. Congress holds the ability to declare war, and from there, you go forth and you wage war. Full stop. Again, the caveat being, unless there is invasion or an imminent attack, as it's on its way, it is coming on the homeland. And you have to substantiate that and say, look, this is what's going on. We have to go. And the president has the authority to be able to repel that. That's it. He cannot just go abroad and destroy whatever monsters somebody like Lindsey Graham decides to whisper into his ear saying, Mr. Trump, I don't really like these thugs in Iran. And so we have to go out and destroy these thugs in Iran because they're mean to their people. That's not a legitimate war. I didn't make the rules. This is the Constitution. It's the founding fathers. Wars of aggression were nowhere in our Constitution whatsoever. Moving forward, how the war state survives, of course, is by president's actions. Congress complains theatrically. So you've seen this before. So say we do get another Democrat president in the future, you're going to see the Republicans piss, moan, and complain about how that war is unconstitutional, but nothing that Trump did or their predecessors before did was unconstitutional. Of course, this is the way that these people are, and we'll be getting into that conversation a little bit later, but it becomes this hypocritical clown show for nothing, right? You have these people that you elect to Congress to move forward with American interests, not the interests of other people, and certainly not the interests of warmongers, but yet here we are. And then after the clown show and after the theatrics and after all of this insanity, it appropriates the money anyways. It just silently approves. It doesn't do anything, and it certainly doesn't fulfill its role that it is delegated authority to do. Instead, it abdicates its position and says, no, this is fine. We're not going to say anything about it. And then they make fun of the few people in Congress that say, no, this is wrong. We need to reassert our authority. No, this is wrong. We need to take our delegated authority back. No, this is wrong. We can't be doing this. And quite frankly, I think it's a mix of both cowardice and absolutely just vile, war-lusting, greedy individuals that would sooner sacrifice your sons and daughters to make a quick dollar, to get a designated outcome in whatever country they want to topple at the expense of the American payers, both in taxes or blood and treasure. These people don't care about you. And what they fully expect you to do is to just cheer on whatever meat grinder it is that they send your sons and daughters into. People don't like talking about that. And, for whatever reason, that's seemingly a taboo subject. And you have so many people that sit here and talk about, well, if we're going to go do this, at least let's do it intensely and get it done and over with. That's the mentality that we have today. It's not the idea of accountability. It's not the idea of actually exerting even our authority as individuals, as the people within our country, to hold these individuals accountable, which, to be fair, is essentially a sense of laziness. We just roll with it. And we say, well, we're already in it, so we might as well just try and do it as fast as we possibly can. Now, the War Powers Resolution, as I had brought up earlier, is constantly misrepresented as it gives presidents a temporary right to wage war. It does not. That is not the case. And even beyond that, there is a strong argument that the resolution itself is constitutionally defective. I have mentioned this numerous times because it tries to regulate after the fact war making instead of preventing it at the front end. We have people that are so lustful for war. They're so greedy. They don't care about the American people. They would much rather get a desired outcome because they want to please one of their friends abroad than it is actually trying to prevent any of this. And I've said this before. We don't have diplomats. We don't have statesmen anymore. We don't have men of sheer courage that are willing to go forth unto the breach and have these intense negotiations. And simply because a negotiation doesn't go your way does not grant you the authority to go and make war because you decide to throw a fit like an absolute feral child, right? There has to be a sense of maturity here. There has to be a sense of accountability here. But yet, any time that you try to impress this, both upon politicians and unfortunately the individuals who suckle at the teat of the state, they get rabid and they get, just absolutely they get very unhappy and they start calling everybody who doesn't agree with them un-American. You're not a patriot. If you don't support the United States in everything that it does, then, you know, and I know somebody's gonna say, well, it's not everything. No, it's pretty much everything. Let's be honest. If you're not supporting the apparatus that's violating the Constitution, that's waging illegal activities and wars and all of these different things, if you don't support that because we're already in it, instead of holding these people accountable, and that's really the crux of the argument and the issue, then you're a bad person. I really have to wonder where people's morals and values are, and where their principles actually lie when they say things like that. Now, I understand, you know, there's always going to be situations, right, where we're in it, but it doesn't mean I have to like it, and it sure as hell doesn't mean that I have to applaud it and support it overwhelmingly. And that doesn't mean that I have any malice. It doesn't mean I have any ill will towards the people that unfortunately are stuck having to be the cudgel for a corrupt state that cares not about their lives. If you ever wanted to wonder how much the U.S. government actually cares about the people it throws into a meat grinder, just look at how they treat veterans and the issues that stand there. So I posit that to you. The result is essentially what we get is a war machine that belongs to the executive in practice, even though the Constitution never intended that, and it sure as hell never supported that. So when we look at this all together, we have to step back and we have to see it for what it is. There's got to be, if they're not going to be transparent, if they're not going to be honest with us, then we have to have a sense of honesty with ourselves, and then take what it is that we know and start to make, we have to start to make the changes. You can't sit there and just cast a vote and just wait for something to change. There's so many mechanisms that we have at our disposal that we can start, and nobody wants to do any of it, it seems. And the very few groups and organizations and people that want to do something about it, like Defend the Guard, a fantastic organization, a fantastic series of legislation that really, really helps our country more than it hurts our country at all, right? I would argue it doesn't hurt our country. You look at these organizations, these are the people that care about the country, not the people who perpetually seek monsters to destroy abroad, using this idea of fear, this perpetual paranoia about somebody's out there to attack us, especially at the behest of another country. In the end of the day, what another country goes through is none of our concern. We need to look inwards and fix our own problems, take care of our own people, and stop finding false adversaries, even if they are real adversaries, to certainly go forth and destroy. We have parameters, we have principles, we have founding documents to support this point. Now, when we look at intellectual, or even just a realm of transparency and honesty, what I think is awfully astounding is the Epstein issue, right? You might be wondering, where does the Epstein fit into the sunk cost state? Well, we're so busy waging wars, and many people have argued that the current war in Iran was a diversion from the Epstein issue. It is the domestic counterpart for the foreign policy lie, essentially, where you have the state that it doesn't always cover things up by completely burying them. Often it covers them up by delaying, redacting, exhausting the public, so making them weary, and pressuring people to move on. Just move on. Just move on. It's fine. You know, they're only degenerates. They're only just absolutely just depraved human beings, and some of the highest positions of power, and there may or may not, you know, look, it's bad enough when you have children that are involved, but that's also not to write off other women who were caught up in this and other people who were caught up in this, right? And they want you just to look away. It's not a big deal. The people that are sending your sons and daughters to die in war are the same people that want you to forget about other people's sons and daughters being exploited by a bunch of freaking degenerates at the highest levels. You want to die for these people. You want to die, like, and I know that people have said, You know, they're serving their country. You think that the people at the top give a single fuck about this country at all? You think that's the case? Well, then I have a freaking $300 million mansion to sell you with everything that you could possibly want. Okay. And full disclosure, unlike the government, I actually don't have that. So, I mean, in the end of the day, we have to be honest about this. We have to have a sense of transparency and responsibility. Why would you ever say it's okay to go fight an illegal war for these people when they're telling you to look away from one of the greatest travesties in American history? In my opinion, it's one of the greatest travesties in American history. And they're telling you to look away. It's insignificant. For a long time, they were saying, oh, none of it exists. None of it exists. It's a Democrat hoax. It's not, like, none of it's real. It's absolutely barbaric. It is so degenerate. And these are the people that want you to believe everything they say about another country, about how evil somebody is or how degenerate somebody is or whatever. The degenerates are trying to tell you who to hate and who to like. That should really pique your sense of thought and your ability to kind of calculate these things and be like, gee, I don't know if I necessarily buy that. You know, some of the core elements that you ultimately see, which is absolutely insane to me, is heavily redacted releases as it pertains to Epstein, which thank God for people, because they've been able to go back and take all the black bars off and really bring into light a lot of these freaking degenerates. Slow walk transparency, selective disclosure, no real appetite for any full institutional exposure whatsoever, because we have to protect the elites and all the freaking degenerates and vile human beings that exist. And then repeated attempts by officials to bury the issue essentially under fatigue and procedure. And the crazy thing is you're also seeing a lot of obfuscation. You're seeing a lot of distortion. Pardon me. You're seeing a lot of distortion in these files, because now it would seem that over the last several weeks to the last month or month and a half, you've had a situation to where they're just creating things and they're just putting names in there in order to try and jumble everything up. At least that's what that's how I've come to understand it based off of some of the information I've seen. And so one has to wonder, why would you go to these attempts? And moreover, when you have the dumping of these 3 million, which they are still in violation of the law, mind you, they still haven't dumped or released the files in a manner that is befitting of the initial law that requires them to. But the point being is, not only are they implementing different things, but now you're having a situation in which we're going to pluck this file out of here. So people started seeing files going missing, like all over the place. And it really begs the question to where it's like, well, if it's not pertinent and it doesn't matter, then why do you have to remove the files? I said this some weeks ago. And so really, again, when you look at the sunk state and you look at the continuation of just rot and this corruption and the freaking degeneracy and I can't express it enough. These people hate you. These people absolutely hate you. And they want you to forget some of the worst things that's come out in American history. And they want you to believe all of these different narratives, and they want you to feel a certain way, and they want you to just be lulled into the sense of safety, quote unquote, to give up more liberties and rights, all under the guise of saying like, well, we're protecting your liberties. We just don't want you to say this, right? So when we go down, it's not transparency whatsoever. It's managed transparency at best. And I would even argue that it's just management. Enough to reduce the public pressure, but it's not enough to expose the full truth. And I would even go a step further and say that the public pressure has only been heightened, if anything. It hasn't really been reduced in any manner, but that's what they're trying to do. They want to pull that, they want to hold that pressure relief valve to try and to try and change that. And once you recognize that pattern and you start to see the secrecy abroad and the secrecy at home, and are that they're not separate problems, that they are the same operating method, it should really evoke a sense of question. What the hell is going on? Why are we trusting these people? Why are we allowing them to get away scot-free? Again, we have instruments and mechanisms at our disposal as people. If we don't like somebody, we can kick them the fuck out. It's that simple. Again, it's not conjecture. It's not my hyperbole. This is within the Constitution. We have the ability to get these people out of their positions. In more ways than one, we have that ability. And yet there's so, and look, it's not denigrating these organizations. If anything, it's lifting them up a little bit to maybe help bring them to exposure. But you have liberty organizations. You have again, people defend the guard or bring our troops home, and so many more out there like them that are really trying to put in the work to salvage and hopefully course correct to some degree this, and they've been working feverishly, but they need so many more people to make this happen. So it's not entirely a lost cause, but man, we've got to get involved, because sitting around just simply complaining is not merely, it's not enough. So keeping all this into consideration, we're going to continue to move forward here. The apparatus of control at home, as we've seen with Epstein, but also what we've seen with a lot of these other issues, war abroad and control at home are two sides of the same state instinct. They're synonymous with each other. What to hit would be things like, some points that I would say that are worth making, not necessarily, well, same, but what I can hit on, or points that are worth making, are things like the surveillance expansion, police militarization. We have fusion centers and intelligence sharing. We have things like financial monitoring, speech suppression justified by security, immigration chaos used to justify more federal overreach, shrinking real oversight, and the list goes on and on. We see things like, increased and renewed efforts to disarm people. Again, we're seeing more disarmament, not only in just the typical states, of like New York and California, but even in my state, which I guess maybe you could say is typical. But the point is it doesn't change, and you start to see this pattern. It's so synonymous with the way that we treat in foreign abroad and in foreign policy, and also the same way that we treat Americans here. The surveillance state apparatus was born of foreign surveillance. When you look at places like the DHS and you look at the things that they've used against the foreign countries, they use it all the same on Americans. And they can sit here, you can have people that'll sit here and just say, well, blah, 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 warrants and this and that and so on and so forth. But look, like you have people like Peter Thiel and Palantir that are trying to, that have been working to make a backdoor for government for an info sharing thing, to where the UK can spy on us, put it into a system, and then sell that information to the US government and to people like Palantir. They're setting up the system, right? It's to skirt around the constitutional issue. And make no mistake, these people don't give a fuck about the Constitution. They don't care about you, and they certainly don't care about your liberty or your rights. But in the end of the day, the point still remains, from war and from the way that we treat people in a foreign sense, it definitely comes to rear its ugly head here at home. And so I think it's very important to not undercut this point. And the apparatus of control at home is every bit as egregious and monstrous as the one that's being created abroad. So, it violates sovereignty abroad, and it lies about war, and it hides scandal, all of these things. But it also has to manage public perception. It has to suppress dissent. It has to centralize a sense of enforcement and build a compliance apparatus at home. Are you supporting the right people? If you're not, well, you're going to be put on a list. Do you have a dissenting opinion? You're going to be put on a list. And it's not just that. I mean, agree or disagree or whatever the case is, like when you look at January 6th, when you look at the Bundy issue, when you look at, the Bundy Ranch issue and Malheur, and you look at the way that the federal government, and not just those examples, but many, many examples of how they just showed up at people's doors, essentially dragged them out of their homes because, well, you're on a list. You're on my list. It's all it takes is a list. It's all it takes is this perception to be like, oh, they're dissenting. And if you don't model yourself along the realm of their shaped sense of public perception and their expectation of support, then this is the type of situation you get. It gets very Orwellian. And I would argue that we've seen a lot of this Orwellian situation already. And this is how the empire comes home. And, the only caveat that I have with that is any empire that's ever existed has always gotten so big that it eventually crumbles under its own weight. But that could be, who knows how long that takes. And I would argue that it does not mean that we should ever stop our attempts and we should never stop in our efforts to try and correct course. We should never stop in our efforts to try and bring about more liberty. We should never stop in our efforts to defend ourselves from tyranny, more importantly. Overall, I mean, it's not an excuse to just sit and do nothing. Now, I had brought this up in the very beginning of the show, kind of alluding to this, but Republicans and Democrats, and I've said this before, they need each other. The two parties they don't really solve a crisis. If anything, they feed on it and they perpetuate it. Where in a few examples, and I've stated this before, especially with the issues in Minnesota, is Republicans always point to things like border, crime, foreign enemies, cultural decline, and they always justify it with more executive power, more surveillance, more policing, more force, and more arbitrary, laws, of course. And then you have the Democrats that always point to extremism. And of course, you could take these examples and you could flip-flop them and do a lot of the same things: extremism, misinformation, authoritarian danger, foreign interference. And they justify it with the same essential points, which is more executive power, more surveillance, more speech control, more bureaucratic authority. All of these things are interchangeable between both of these parties. And like I said, they equally hate you. These people have a policy to where you come last compared to everybody else. And especially if you start to go against that doctrine, then you really come last and you become the object of their desire and exerted sense of control. But there is this idea that these two parties are different. And look, I'm here to tell you, there's so many examples that are set forth before us, and especially in just the nearly 33 years that I've existed on this earth. I mean, there's a litany of them where both Democrats and Republicans eventually come together to undermine the American people. We see this in things like firearms. We see this thing in things like wars. We see this in things like taxation and more financial and economic things. We see this also in infrastructure projects and other, very interest group oriented type things, to where if there's a potential payout or there's a potential advantage, which is more centralizing of power and influence and control, then they both are going to agree that, it's more for the benefit of them. And they'll do it under the guise of safety. They'll do it under the guise of a better tomorrow, or whatever catchphrase or slogan that they want to use. That's very convenient for them to justify all of this. You can sit here and try and argue that, Republicans are different in this and Democrats are different in this, but in the end of the day, it's two heads or it's two wings of the same bird, and ultimately it's two sides of the same coin. These people really just have an appetite for everything that they can gain off of the expense of the American people, and then eventually, when they start having all of their friends and they start having all of their allies, they will exploit you even farther in order to benefit them. Oh, well, these countries, mind you, also exploit their own people. So it's like birds of a feather flock together. Look, it becomes a situation where, you know, they do not agree on the cause necessarily, always the cause of the crisis. They only need really to agree that the crisis justifies centralization and that it's a benefit to them. They only need to agree on the fact that they can get something and tout it out and drag it out in front of you and say, like, oh, this is for the good of the people, it's for good of society, et cetera, et cetera. That's all they really need, and that's why both parties they need each other. If you have one that dies out, the other is not long to die out. To die out either. They feed on each other, and this mechanism is extremely dangerous. It's why they work feverishly to keep other parties and third parties out of any form of the political arena whatsoever. And you even have legislation to where third parties are not recognized in some places. And so it becomes a situation where when that's all you have are two competing heads, what makes you think that these people care about you? What makes you think that they have your best interest, especially if you have a dissenting opinion? You could be a lifelong Republican or a Democrat, and as soon as you start to change the way that you perceive things, the way that you understand things, whatever, even if it's minuscule, you will be absolutely brought through the ringer, or they will try so hard to get you to fall back in line. It's never like, oh, okay, yeah, I never really thought about that. It's okay, we can agree to disagree. These people are rabid. They're rabid, and they're a bunch of lying, thieving degenerates, as I'm sure as most of us have been able to kind of figure out in the past year. They need each other, and each side's excess really becomes each side's excuse overall. So moving on, I want to end on the founders' warning. The founders feared things like standing armies, executive war making, secrecy, the use of fear to enlarge government. They came from this, right? And from a liberty first perspective, which is what I come from, right? A liberty first perspective, it's repugnant because these things are, war becomes normalized, sovereignty is disregarded, truth eventually ends up being managed, which ultimately is untruth, if you will, or at least a half truth, which I think is one of the most dangerous things in the world. And control expands domestically under the cover of security and order, right? It's, you know, we have to help these people. We have to do it for your security. We have to do this to maintain, you know, the safety of our country. And we have to have a strong, you know, apparatus. And these are all the talking points that they put out. It's not, this is not something, make no mistake about it, this is not something that's a constitutional republic acting in defense. It is a state preserving itself through force and through narrative. So in closing, the sunk cost state essentially will never correct itself. If it did, man, like I said, I have a $300 million mansion with everything you could ever want and your heart desires to sell you, and joke's on you, I don't. So the government, man, a government disinvested in things like intervention, secrecy, image management, and control. And one of the examples I can point out is, you know, we have this administration right now to where everything's fine. Everything's fine. It's the greatest it's ever been. You've never seen it so great. It's just this perpetual self-masturbatory disposition. Nothing is ever wrong. Everything is always right. And there's no failures. There's no ability to admit wrong whatsoever. I mean, when you look at the way that they fire people, Kristi Noem was just fired. There was no like, hey, you know, like we feel like she wasn't doing the best of job. We feel like she was not as effective. That was a failure on our part. Perhaps we should have done this sooner, et cetera, et cetera. And if they do happen, man, that's a unicorn moment right there. But they virtually never do, right? They cannot easily, like when you have a situation like this, they can't easily reverse course because reversal would require a confession, an admission, an adherence to responsibility, and adherence to ownership of these things that they've done wrong or things that they've gotten wrong or whatever the case is. And confession is what power fears most. They don't want to be the one having to provide a confession of all the things that they've done wrong or to be honest because it would damn them. especially when you look at the wars, when you look at Epstein, when you look at the abuses that they've leveraged against, the American people, not just this administration in particular. I want to be clear on that. This is a buildup of many, 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 many administrations, because it all builds up to what we have today. They would have to confess to it. These people would be damned for eternity. And quite frankly, you see this mentality when they say, like, if people saw what we saw in the Epstein files, it would drive people insane, right? And you've had some people say, well, if people saw what they saw in the Epstein files, that it would destroy everything we know as we know it, or it would topple things, or it would tear down these apparatuses or these institutions. And I'm here to tell you, I'm of the mindset to where I say, fuck it, and let's do it. Say when, because there needs to be a reset. But these people, they will make every excuse under the book to send your sons and daughters to war and to hide people, these degenerate, vile, repugnant, freaking monsters, in order to avoid telling you the truth. These people don't care about you. I know I've said that, and I know I've said that they hate you a number of times, but at what point do you not realize something like that? I don't parse words here, right? And I try to say it like it is. And I just hope at some point, more and more, and I think we're seeing it, but I hope more and more people really start to see this for what it is. And, on kind of a final note, look, the sunk cost state will not stop until the people refuse to call conquest, peace, secrecy, transparency, or lack of transparency and the control of liberty for what it is. Again, none of this changes without you and me. None of this changes without a sense of responsibility. None of this changes without us being involved. And when I was coming into this episode tonight, and there's a reason why I didn't do it last night, because I wanted to make sure that I tried to hit the things that I wanted to hit. I was frustrated. I was very upset. Admittedly, it's angering. It's infuriating seeing the things that go on. It's infuriating seeing just the seeming like conniving, just some of these people are just, they have malice in their hearts for their own people. And, and you look at situations like Epstein, you look at the crumbling infrastructure, you look at so many of the economic woes, and we're overfighting wars. We're overfighting wars. And you have the administration today or recently that just talked about like Cuba, like, oh, Cuba's next. Why is Cuba next? Why is Cuba our problem? Again, I can't harp on it enough. These are the same people that want you to forget about the freaking vile, degenerate monsters surrounding the Epstein files, the protected class of people. They're protecting these people, and they want you to forget about it and go and die on behalf of another country, and they want you to forget about anything bad that's happening here, all while they sit here and they gaslight you, telling you how fucking great everything is. It's perfect. It's the best. We're in the golden age of America. The fucking golden age of America was a long time ago, and we weren't protecting fucking pedophiles. I don't know what's so hard about that. You have these fucking people over here, pardon me, but you have these people out here that are eating this shit up and saying like, oh no, it's all great. It's not war. It's all a hoax. It's all this. It's all that. You people are fucking delusional. Absolutely delusional. And you want all of us, all the other people, to forget about this. There's parents that their kids are still missing. And it happens every single day, every day. How many videos you see of and Sean Ryan's even, and if anybody watches Sean Ryan, he's had a number of people on his show that go out and they catch these motherfuckers, these predators, and all of these other people. You have people that catch scammers all the time. The average person's doing more to purge the worst fucking people from our society than our government is, but you're supposed to go and die for a fucking lie and for other people. And we're living in the golden era of America. At what point do you step back and you're like, give me a break, dude? Give me a break, It's so freaking vile and repugnant. And God bless everybody. Seriously, good on everybody who sees this for what it is. Because this is going to come to a head at some point. And boy, I don't know what that looks like, but the genie's out. They see this for what it is. The sunk state is going to sink eventually. And man, I don't know, man. I hope that there's some grace. I really just I hope that there is some peace sometime, whether it's near the end of my life or it's in the next several generations, because my goodness, man, this is just absolutely just horrible. There's no other way to put it. So with that being said, I'm going to go back. I'm going to peruse some of the comments. Thank you everybody for commenting. And I want to give you guys and gals some love here. So if you'll give me just a moment, I'm going to go through and check out some comments and respond to some of those. So looks like Ground Fog, Gene, David, learn me something. Thank you guys for coming in. Let's see. Avis, KW, thank you. Thank you for coming in the comments. I just want to make sure I get everybody. I think I saw, is it Mayor? I think that's who it is, Mayor. Thank you also for coming in. So let's see some of the comments. Becoming an empire is extremely dangerous for us. Absolutely. Yeah, empires, they not only don't benefit the average person in a sense, right? You might see some instantaneous benefits, right? To where it's like, oh, like we control a lot, so the prices are down or whatever the case is, but it never ends good for people. History tells us this. Before you know it, this stuff just comes crumbling down, and oftentimes it does so very violently. It's not it. It's not it. I really hope that at some point, maybe we get to see a little bit more of the Republic come back, but I can hope. I'm a hopeful realist though. It won't be long before crude oil goes over $100 a barrel. Well, I mean, we'll have to see. It's not been that high since 2002. I'd have to look and see exactly what that was, but it wouldn't surprise me in the least, David, if we saw the crude go up like that. Now, the argument could be made we're taking crude out of Venezuela, but that stuff requires a lot of processing. It's not as good of crude, so it takes a little bit more. So there's going to be more inherent expenses. Also, I think it's Avis. The Second Amendment is useless without machine guns. I wouldn't necessarily say useless, but I would say it definitely makes it very difficult. And I think that if we're going to have an honest conversation between amongst ourselves and with other people, the Second Amendment, absolutely, we need to move to have machine guns. We need to move and have all of the things, the weapons of war available to us, the individuals, as it was intended. So, yeah, I mean, and in the end of the day, with the way things are going, man, I mean, it really does become one of those things to where how long, if things deteriorate bad enough, how long before you start to see black markets open up and people just don't care anymore? I've wondered that for a long time. So it'll be, I don't want to say it'll be interesting to see, but man, it is definitely, it'll be something for sure. The biggest thing our government, this is by David again, our government has done is to completely separate us, the American citizen. The more they can make us believe their fear and lies, the more they separate us as the American. Let's see here, as the Americans, citizens. I think that's what you said. So yeah, no, whoops, I'm getting crazy over here. No, yeah, it's the vision game is the game they've been playing for a long time, and they certainly do not want us to come to a consensus on the fact that they're a bunch of freaking dirtbags. So, and that what they do is absolutely just horrendous to us. They want us to go back to sleep. Learn me something. Yeah, you're not wrong, man. That is absolutely it. I'm going to scroll down a little bit more. Both parties will take advantage of the American people to get whatever they want. They don't care about the American people at all. Yeah, you're not wrong. And quite the fiery Redbeard tonight, or redhead tonight. Well, I've said this before. Beard's the only thing I got that's red. So I was born blonde, and then my blonde gave up and gave way to brown. But the beard, I think, definitely draws it out. So, you know, it is what it is. Sometimes you gotta, maybe I'm adopting the, taking a hammer to things. Seems to work well enough for other people to just get behind it. So, same here, Redbeard. This is by Mayor. Seems to be an entity in this nation that wants to separate, even segregate citizens. It is terrible. Yeah, no, it absolutely. Unification, general consensus, the idea of people, look, I think when we step back and we look at people coming together, right? People are always going to have a difference of opinion. They're always going to look at something slightly different. And I don't expect everybody to be the most, hyped up, liberty loving person. I don't expect that. It's actually not even realistic point of view. But I think that should not stop us also from being able to go talk to our neighbors, to get out into our communities, to talk to real people instead of forming our perceptions based off of what we see explicitly on X. When you get out there and you talk to people, you find out that you have a lot more in common with people than you think. And in addition to that, the other thing that I would like to try and put out there as well is through proper dialogue, you can potentially get people to at least understand or come over to your perception or your point of view, right? But we have to be willing to engage each other. We should not be buying into this idea that everybody hates everybody. I reject that notion. And I think that we have to do better as Americans of actually extending and reaching the people we can to come to some form of a consensus that we can try to make this at least somewhat of a better place. Again, I know not everybody's going to be explicitly of the liberty mindset. That's not what I'm saying, but we gotta try a lot harder than we do. I just want to live peacefully. There's another one from Mayor. There's a couple here. And enjoy a taco for lunch and have some top tier bratwurst for dinner. But there's absolute psychopaths that would rather sacrifice my kids for war. Absolutely. It's look. I mean, there's a lot of. It's unfortunate the amount of control and the amount of or like the driving force that's behind so much of this, right? To where it's like what it becomes is like, oh, you're living so well now, like we're a first world nation, which I mean to some degrees, depending on where you go in the United States, that's pretty fucking debatable. But I digress, we might be majority first world, but man, there's some dives, and I my heart to some degree that there's people that are stuck in places like that, man, and my heart kind of goes out to them. But it's it is amazing, right? Like you would think that aside from like decent food, like just decent food, basic functioning infrastructure, like water, roads, power and electrical grids and all of these things, you would think that we would be spending a lot of time actually investing in this. But what you get is a bunch of half-hearted attempts at like trying to bolster the infrastructure, or you get all of this shit poisonous food and they're just like, well, this is what you're getting, and you'll like it. Meanwhile, we have to send sons and daughters to war because we have more of an interest over here than we do for our own people. It becomes absolutely insane. It's like, if you could imagine something is simple, right? Just something is simple. And I've said this a number of times, but it is astonishing to me how so many other places, and it's not an advocation for other places' government, but it is stunning to me how so many other places can have clean streets. Other countries can have clean streets. And you go to so many cities in the United States, and it's just littered with garbage. It's just absolutely littered with garbage. You have people that shit on the streets. You have people that throw garbage all over. You have all of these different things, there's just no real concerted effort or attempt to even try and clean up the streets, right? There's places that just smell horrible. It's like, and then it's like you look at some of these other places, and again, I'm not saying they're right in the way that they get to that, but it is amazing to me how some of these places streets are so freaking clean you could probably eat off them. And then it's like you look at some of the places even in my state, and it's just like, my gosh, dude, like we spend trillions of dollars on war. And could you just imagine where we could be if we spent even a fraction of that on our local infrastructure, our national infrastructure, and we actually did something meaningful with it, but war is the object, man. So one more or two more. The 2A doesn't explicitly mention guns, and that's the direction we're headed, unfortunately. It's a solid ass beard, though. Hey, I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for that. I tried. Had it since, I don't know, like 19 or 20. So it's been going strong for a long time. But you're right. It says arms, right? And which is, it's one of those things to where arms is whatever, there's no definition on what arm, on like what type of arm. There's no definition on whatever. It was just arms. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, right? And so it is one of those things to where, it's like, look, we have to start doing more. And we look at, hey, I said this earlier, but I just don't think it's that far. I really don't think it's that far until the policies start to catch up, and they ultimately bring it back here, and you start to see disarmament of people who dissent. And I think we've already seen that to many degrees. So that being said, I'm going to wrap it up. I thank you so much for everybody that took the time to come and check out the episode tonight. Thank you so much for taking the time with me. I really appreciate you. And as I said in the very beginning, please hit that like and subscribe and share this video if you thought it was worthwhile, if you got something out of it. If you even if you don't, like, put a comment down below and let me know why. And because all of the support really helps. Apologies, I got a little salty, got a little spicy near the end there, but man, like I said, I wasn't even sure if I wanted to do it tonight either, because I was just so incensed by everything that's going on, and it is so hard to keep up. But thank you for joining me once again, and hopefully we will see you all back on Saturday at 1700. I don't remember if it's going to be this. I think next Saturday. I might be having a guest on. I will try and do an update throughout the week to let you know if I'm going to be getting my guest on. He's been on before. Not going to spoil it for you, but I got to make sure that I got him cinched. Once I know, you guys and gals will know. So, yeah, thanks for a great show, and we will see you all on the next one down the road on Saturday, 1700 Central. Thanks.